Mr. Elad Shaviv, who is the CEO of Israel Smart Energy Association, to kick us off in the right direction about grid modernization.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I'm trying to think, I was trying to think on when we're talking about grid modernization, and I've been hearing a lot of very interesting sessions and during the last 2 days, and I'm sure they're going to be also tomorrow. I would like to take a bit of a high-level approach, a bit related to the previous session, smart cities, but maybe just to start with, it's been a long day, and a quick question just to see how many people here believe that the world is flat. If you can just raise your hands. See that? Okay, we have one, only one. Because I don't know if you know, but just a few months ago, there was a conference in North Carolina, which was called Flat Earth International Conference. It was completely sold out. So there is a new movement. So, you're not alone. There are quite a lot of people that believe that the world is flat. And the interesting thing is, when I was thinking about my kids are 14 and 21 years old, and they believe that the world is flat. But they're looking on the world a bit differently. So if you look on, I just gave here a few examples, but I think that we can all think of so many other different examples. The world has become flatter and is becoming more and more flat every day in terms of resources. When we're talking about Uber or Ola or Airbnb, they're all using assets that are not theirs, right? Upwork, I live in Israel, and I'm using people all around the world, consultants from all around the world, from India, from China, from the Philippines, from the US, every place. Even Facebook or Instagram, they're all flattening the world because we all get the information from everyone to everyone at every point, at every location. So we do see the world getting flatter and flatter, and it depends on which generation you are. For the younger generation, it just seems very, very natural. That's why I'm saying that for my kids, the world is completely flat. They don't see the hierarchy. We've seen that also in political issues, right? We've seen a lot of political changes that came actually now that you couldn't have seen them happening even 10 years ago. I'm not talking about a century ago. Even 10 years ago, you couldn't see. So the world is getting flat. And we see that also in energy. So, I've seen that evolution of the world, which has nothing to do with energy, but it's very interesting to see the association to the energy world. So the whole humanity started as hunters or gathered. We were completely dependent on food, where it was, when it was, and that actually relates to fossil energy. We gather in energy, we look for energy, but we don't produce any energy. Then the agrarian phase, which relates to renewable farm, we started to get more control. We're still dependent on the nature, but we started to get more control. We started to farm and be able to produce energy, even if it does not exist there, at least not in a way that we could have used. The industrial age or the nuclear, when we started to be completely on control on generating energy or making energy where it is not there. And then we started to move into the information era. And that relates really to the flattening world, and that's really the smart energy. So smart energy enables us, and I think what we've heard over the last 2 days, a lot of sessions that are talking about sensors, about smart meters, about smart cities. All this means at the end of the day that we get a lot of information and we work with this information. And this brings us into the new energy markets, which are the connection economy, which means that everything at the end of the day would relate on connections, and everything needs to serve that. And so when we're talking about grid modernization, I think that we need to look just a bit further ahead. It's not too much further ahead. It would probably be just like 2-3 years ahead. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe even less than that, where everything would relate on connections. Energy is just one of the services that would be there, and I have no idea if people would continue to pay for energy or not, just as people are barely paying today for communication. 20 years ago, we would pay 10 years ago, we would have paid a lot for communications. I was sitting here and Googling while I'm sitting here in India. A few years ago, this would have cost me a fortune to do because my mobile service is Israeli. Now I can do it in a fraction of this cost. It's available to everyone. So we've seen that happening in various industries. I believe that we'll see that also happening in energy. And when we're talking about grid modernization, we have to think on the bigger picture and where all this technology would fit and how it would fit with that. So very few sessions that I've seen here, we're talking about microgrids. Microgrid has different definitions. So let's put aside for a second the definition of a microgrid. But if we're talking about smart cities and the empowerment of communities, those might be cities, those might be military camps, as we've seen around here, those might be universities or any type of maybe neighborhoods. With smart cities or smart communities, the community would get more empowerment. And energy is just one of the services or the needs that every community would have. So when we're talking about the microgrid, it means that with the empowerment and managing their infrastructure and managing their services, they would most probably get more and more engaged in managing their energy consumption, energy trade. There might be also issues because the technology is there, but the sophistication may be too much for every community to hold. So there are different ways that this may work, but eventually we may look on that sort of cells that would eventually be connected to the grid. So we will still have a grid, we'll have the bulk generation connected to it, the energy markets connected to it, but the behavior is completely different. The motivation is completely different. Maybe on the technical level it would be quite similar, but we need to understand the motivation. Once we start to get into energy as part of this smart community, it has to relate to the overall goals of that community. And that community might be a non-for-profit, but it might be a for-profit. So we are looking on neighborhoods, we are looking on campuses, but we are looking also on enterprises that may hold it. So eventually, at the moment, energy is just a cost center, but energy can become also a strategic asset. With energy, when we know who is using what energy, we get a lot of data. Data can be monetized today. So I think that it's the time to start and look not only on the lower levels here on distributed energy resources management systems or energy automation, which is mostly what I see the world looking at right now, automating energy, and in some places a bit more on IT management. But I think that the most important thing on grid modernization would be to see how this fits into the overall community's goals or those that are going to use it goals. And with that, we need to see how this relates to customized services or softwares that relate to these communities. And then special business applications, how energy can serve special business applications. And there are a lot of thoughts about it. You know, if I know exactly who is doing what and where, we can better plan everything. Remember that energy drives everything. So if we have the information about energy, we can see the trends, we can see the patterns, we know the needs. This can be very relevant to a lot of different services. And with that, we need to think also on much more sophisticated applications, either for the utilities or for others that would be relevant for energy. I'm not sure that it would always be the utilities. It really depends on the utility decision. They can take the role or they can decide not to take the role. We've seen it in telco world, for example. The telco utilities took the role and today they are flourishing. In the postal services, they haven't taken the role and other private enterprises got into it. What I've seen in the world today, I think that the power utilities are taking the role, and that's great, but it's a complete shift in mind because it's a complete different type of applications and of services. So just to wrap everything, we see here disruptive innovation, and there's a big difference between just innovation or inventions and disruptive innovation. As a quick example, inventing the wheel was a great invention, but it was only when they started to have it part of a carriage or other transportation or other machines where it became disruptive innovation. So we see that the energy market are facing major business disruption, And we see new players that are creating completely new playgrounds. And in some places, energy becomes already free of charge. In other places, may not. But it's a completely different playground. New players that you've never thought would get into the energy play are getting into that. And that requires a lot of care from all the current players. A very interesting point is the regulators, because everyone is looking on the regulators. We got used that regulators are defining markets and the business follows the regulators. That has changed over the last few decades. And again, if I'm looking, for example, on the internet, the market was there, regulators follows. And we see that in other sections. Drones, for example, today. Okay, we have drones everywhere. Regulators are thinking now what to do with drones. And I think that with energy, it's the same. Regulators would just have to follow rather than lead changes. That means that the industry has to be in front, ahead of the regulators. So traditional energy players, I think, have huge future, a lot of opportunities, but they must adapt rather than to be, not to be left behind. And then thinking about the modernization, really have a broad thinking and a much more business-oriented rather than technical thinking. I think that with that I've wrapped up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elad.